This is my favorite movie of all time. This is Rocky. And if you haven't seen Rocky before, I'd like to welcome you to the planet Earth. But basically, the reason that I love Rocky so much, and the original Rocky, the very first Rocky, is for this scene right here. And that Rocky goes back to his corner. He's the underdog. He's getting beat up. He's getting knocked down again and again and again. And he goes back to his corner because he's frustrated. He's frustrated that the champion is beating him so easily, even though he's given everything he's got. So he walks back to his corner and he looks at his corner man and he says, I ain't going down again. I ain't going down no more. And that was the thing, it was almost like a little switch went in his brain, and he said, even though this guy's bigger than me, even though this guy's better than me, I'm not gonna let him knock me down one more time in this fight. I might not beat him, but I'm not letting him knock me down again. And the reason that piece of that movie was so important to me is because that's exactly how I felt when a patient of mine walked into my office 4 years into my practice. I opened up a practice from scratch in a town that I didn't know anybody in. 4 years into practice, I was doing very well. I had my own successful seminar series teaching Thompson. I was seeing lots of people in practice. I was educating lots of people. I thought life could not be better as a chiropractor. And then a patient walked into my office and said, hey, Dr. John, have you seen this medical doctor on the internet that's bashing chiropractors and basically saying that chiropractors don't know anything that they're talking about? There's no scientific evidence behind anything they do. And as a matter of fact, if you walked into a chiropractic office and asked them to explain scientifically how they're doing all of this stuff, that they wouldn't even have an answer for you. So at the time I said, no, I haven't seen this. I said, come to my personal office. We popped open my laptop and I said, show me where you found this. So he types up a website called quackwatch.com. Okay? Have some of you guys seen this video I'm about to describe here? Some of you guys have. There's a medical doctor up there. His name is Dr. Kissinger out of Oklahoma. And he sits back and he's a well-dressed guy, speaks very well, and he's in front of a group of lay people. So he's not in front of a group of his peers. He's not in front of a group of chiropractors. He's in front of a group of the public. Okay? And he sits back and he says, thanks for ripping up all this paper, Dr. Ribley. I could use some of it right now. He has a whole bunch of brochures in his hands that you would find in any chiropractic office, chiropractic in pregnancy, chiropractic in low back pain, chiropractic whatever, okay? And he sits back and he says, do you know that chiropractors can claim anything they want, even though they have no scientific evidence behind any of it? He goes, look at this stuff. And he pulls out a brochure, he goes, chiropractic in pregnancy, chiropractic in the elderly, chiropractic in cancer. And he was so flippin' arrogant, and I hated watching it. But the thing was, he was a really good speaker, and he was really passionate. And the thing that got me is when they said chiropractic in pregnancy, they zoomed in on a pregnant woman. The cameraman zoomed in on a pregnant woman, and the pregnant woman went, ugh. And then they said chiropractic in the elderly, and they zoomed in on an elderly woman, and she was like, ugh. So he was doing a really good job very quickly instilling not only fear, he was doing a great job basically educating people that if you're even considering going to a chiropractor, you're an idiot. Okay, he was doing a very good job at that. So he continues on, and at the very end of his presentation, he says, you might be wondering why a busy medical doctor like myself travels around the country to educate people not to go to chiropractors. And he has this big billboard behind him, and he says, the last thing on this billboard, which is the medical oath, he says, is to protect the public at all costs. And he says, I take that very seriously. And if you go to a chiropractor, you're taking your life in your own hands. They don't know what they're doing, blah, 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 blah. And then the last thing he says, the very last thing he says, he goes, I challenge you. He says, if you ever want to go into a chiropractic office, he goes, I challenge you to do this. I challenge you to ask them to explain scientifically what they do. And besides them saying something like, bone's going to put pressure on nerve, which equals something bad, besides something like that, they're not going to be able to explain it scientifically to you. Okay? At the end of this presentation, the camera guy goes up to people and says, did you like the presentation? What'd you like about it? What didn't you? Everybody that they asked loved the presentation. Everybody. Okay? Then here's the thing. They said, what did you like about it? Number one answer. Do you know what everybody said? Everybody? He seemed to really know what he was talking about. He used a lot of big words. He impressed them. And then the second most common answer, he was very passionate. Very passionate in what he did. Okay? When I watched this video for the very first time when I was 4 years into practice, I wanted to hunt this guy down and beat him. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I thought. I know violence isn't the answer, but do we really know that? You know, we should test this out. Anyway, Anyway, I'm just saying, maybe the theory hasn't been completely tested. That's all I'm saying. So I sat there and I was like, holy cow. Then my patient, who was a mechanical engineer, asked me the question that then changed my life in chiropractic. He looked at me and he said, hey, Dr. John, he goes, listen, he goes, I'm an engineer. And he said, I learned a lot of science and stuff in school that I forget because the only thing that I really know as an engineer is the stuff that I work on every day. So if people ask me other stuff I learned, I really couldn't explain it either. So it doesn't really surprise me if some medical doctor says you can't scientifically explain anything. It doesn't really make a difference to me. He said, but like you teach in the profession, right, John? And I said, I do. I travel around the world teaching Thompson taking. He goes, that's right, that's right. He goes, I read about that. He said, here's the thing. So you could explain it, right? And I said, I'm sorry? And he said, you could explain it, right? You could explain why people get pregnant in your office, because I saw that every week. You could explain why people's immune systems get better with chiropractic, because I saw that every week too. And I bold-faced lied to him. I bold-faced lied to him. I said, absolutely, I can explain it. No question. If he would have called me on my bluff right there, I would have looked like a moron. Because truthfully, this was my explanation to everybody at that point in time. Here's your problem. Bone out of place, puts pressure on nerve, equals bad. I can use bigger terms, but that's basically what I was educating patients and hitting everybody with, okay? So I hated myself for that. I hated myself for that. Because the thing was, is I, number one, hate lying to people, but I literally got to that point, just like the Rocky movie, where I sat back and I said, I will never, ever be put in this position again. I will never be put in this position where a patient or a colleague or a medical doctor or an optometrist or whoever ever asks me the power of chiropractic and to explain it. I will never be put in a position that I cannot explain it scientifically. See, people sit back and say, oh, John, he's kind of a science guy. No, I'm a chiropractor, which means I have to be able to be good at the art, and I adjust people every day in my office. I have to have a strong philosophy in chiropractic, and I believe in the principles of chiropractic, and I have to know the science so that I can back up my philosophy. You with me? We have to be great at all three. And that was the turning point of my career where I sat back and I said, I'm going to dedicate my life to this now. I'm going to learn everything I possibly can about the subluxation so that I know what it is and I can explain it to other people. Because if I can't explain it to other people, because listen, I'm just a practicing chiropractor. I'm not a neurologist. I have the exact same education that everybody in this room has. I may have read a little bit more, but other than that, I have the same education as you. And for my students in here, I was in the same position you were in. Okay? So I want you to learn from me. Don't make the same mistake I made. And if the very first thing I would like to start off my presentation is this. The reason you are so powerful as a chiropractor is because every time you adjust somebody, you have a direct effect on their brain. You're not spine doctors, you're brain doctors. Every time you adjust someone, you have a direct effect on their brain, and it's that direct effect on the brain that allows the body to adapt and heal. Well, how come, John? Because everything happens in the brain. Any information going up turns into an electrical stimulus and then turns into chemical. So can we chalk up that video for me, please, guys? I want to show you a quick video of how the nervous system works in a nutshell, because what I want to talk about today is this very, very important connection that we have to understand. Every time you adjust someone, you reset the nervous system, but what does that mean? It means that you are going to send specific chemicals, specific hormones into the body. You're going to stop some, and you're going to help others be released. Can we get that video up for me, please? So everything starts in the brain. It'll all start off as an electrical stimulus. So these electrical stimulus is constantly firing, and what they do is they prep the nerve. They are prepping the nerve to say, what hormones do I want to release? What chemicals do I want to release? Because depending on the chemicals, depending on the hormones, is going to give you a specific behavior when it all is said and done. So they prep these chemicals up. Those chemicals will go to the very end of your nerve. And when it communicates with the end of another nerve, that's going to be a specific behavior. So for example, see all those little balls going through, those are hormones. So if those hormones are things like adrenaline and cortisol, you're going to have all kinds of aggression. If those chemicals are things like serotonin and dopamine, you're going to have all kinds of happiness and healing and all that kind of good stuff. So depending on the hormone that's released is going to depend on the behavior. You guys with me so far? Now, some of you have seen me speak before. I always start off with this thing because it's the concept that we have to embrace and love about chiropractic. Embrace and love. Your subluxation causes a stress response to occur in the brain. This is proven. We already know this. Okay? Because of the distortion on all the supporting structures that support a vertebrae, bad information rushes to the brain. When that bad information rushes up to the brain here, the biggest thing that's going to happen is you are going to cause a stress response, which basically means these two systems, the SAS and the HPA axis, are going to be instigated. I don't want you to worry about the name of those systems. I want you to worry about the end results. When you have a subluxation, or any stressor for that matter, you're going to end up with two specific hormones released: adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline and cortisol. Now, short term, those things are good for you. Why is it good? Because people ask me this all the time, but like, John, but if the stress response is an innate response, why is it bad for us? It's not bad for you. Short term. Please remember that. The stress response short-term helps you. The stress response short-term gets you out of a bad situation, gets you ready for fight or flight, things like that. If somebody had a gun to your head, you need adrenaline, you need cortisol to get out of the situation. Short-term. But what if that stressor doesn't go away? What if that stressor doesn't go away? What if people are in a terrible marriage? What if people have a sick child? What if people fight in like these Iraq wars and they have all these crazy traumas that they've seen, their best friend's arms blow off and all? That stuff never leaves them. What I need you to understand is the subluxation causes the same type of damage as all of those things. Because the subluxation causes two types of stress occur in the brain. Number one, it's a physical stressor because of all the distortion. Number two, it's a chemical stressor because of the amount of inflammation that builds up because of the subluxation. Every time somebody's subluxated, bad information's going in the brain. So the brain says, I got to do something to protect myself. So I'll release adrenaline and I'll release cortisol. Short term, that's a good deal for you. Long term, these hormones kill you. Do you understand me? Long term, these hormones kill you. So what I want to start off with is I'm going to build on this now, and I want to talk about a very specific structure called the hippocampus. And you guys have all learned this in school, but why is this so important for you to understand? The hippocampus is the area of your brain that is associated with learning and memory. Learning and memory. Okay, it's also linked to olfaction and hearing. So smell and hearing are 100% emotion that helps you learn. So I'm sure you've experienced something like this in your life, right? Have you ever walked in a mall, you walk by someone who may be wearing the cologne or perfume of an old boyfriend or girlfriend, and instantaneously you go back to that person? Right? Like you're like, oh yeah, that was John, 2010, he was great, right? Like you instantly go right back to that person, right? We've all gone through something like that. Or you ever hear an old song, you're like, oh my God, that was high school prom, I remember it right away. That is the hippocampus that immediately brings you right back to that. Okay, you with me on that so far? Here's what you need to understand about the hippocampus. When you have stress hormones in the body, that cortisol leaking in the body, it damages the hippocampus. It damages it. So cortisol goes all the way up to the hippocampus here. So you have the subluxation causing all that cortisol, all that stress. When that goes up to the hippocampus, it damages it. Think about this for a second. How many of you, all my students in here for a second, when you're under a tremendous amount of stress, is it easier to remember things? Heck no, right? You forget stuff right away. You're like, oh my God. Even us, our chiropractors in this room, you might have forgotten how it is to study for like 20 tests in a week. But how about you when you have 1,000 things to do in one day and your husband or wife says, oh, by the way, can you just pick up some milk on the way home? And you're like, oh crap, I forgot the milk. Because the bottom line is, when you're under tremendous amounts of stress, the hippocampus gets damaged because cortisol specifically targets it, and damages the structure. See, why do I bring this up? I was in front of a very large chiropractic audience once, and I said, show of hands, how many of you, if I walked into your office right now and I said, I have low back pain, can you help with as a chiropractor? I said, how many of you would be confident saying I could help? 90% of the room raised their hand. Okay, I said, perfect, good. I said, now, I'm a dad who walked in with his 5-year-old child. And I said, same question now. My kid has learning disabilities. Can chiropractic help with that? Now I'm preaching the choir in here. But in that particular group, 30% of the population raised their hand. 30%. How come it went from 90% to 30%? Why did the certainty go from back pain, yes, I can help you. Learning disability, no. I don't think I can do that. You see, I don't want you to believe in chiropractic. I don't want you to believe in it. I want you to understand. Because if you can understand, you don't have to believe. It's like if you believe in gravity or not, it doesn't really matter. It exists, okay? The big thing is I want you to understand it. Because if you understand that when someone's subluxated, the reason you're helping a kid's disability is not because C2 hooks up to something in the brain. That's not it. The way that you're helping them is because every time you adjust them, you stop the stress response. And when you stop the stress response, you stop the release of cortisol. And if you stop the release of cortisol, you stop the damage to the hippocampus. And that's where learning and memory starts to come back for these kids or adults or anywhere else. You guys with me on this? I want to give you a little study here because the big thing that we need to understand is that learning is tied into emotions. And one of the other speakers talked about that earlier today. Learning is tied into emotions. You don't, like a lot of people think, oh, it's got to be logical to learn. That's actually not true. It's emotions that tie into learning. So let me give you an example. They did a great monkey study. And what they did is this. They had 4 monkeys, they put it into a cage, and inside the cage, they had a ladder. And on the top of the ladder, they put a whole bunch of bananas on it. So as soon as the monkeys noticed the bananas, they started to climb up the ladders to get the bananas. But as soon as one monkey went up the ladder to get one of the bananas, they sprayed the other monkeys with freezing cold water. So very quickly, the monkeys figured out anytime one of the monkeys goes up the ladder, we're gonna get sprayed with water. This is uncomfortable, we don't want this. So anytime a monkey would go up the ladder, the other monkeys would jump on him and beat him up so that wouldn't happen. So, right? I mean, think about it. No one wants to get punished, so they're like, forget it. Nobody gets those bananas. Nobody goes up the ladder. So those 4 monkeys figured out the rules real quick, okay? Then the researchers replaced one of the monkeys. So now we got a new monkey and 3 original monkeys. So the new monkey comes into the cage and says, hey, there's bananas up here. You guys are idiots. So he goes up to try to get the bananas. What happens to the new monkey? They all beat him up, right? So very quickly, the new monkey thinks, oh, I can't go up this ladder. So now the researchers replace another one of the old monkeys. So now we got 2 old, 2 new. The new monkey comes in, tries to get the bananas again. All the other monkeys, including the first new one, jump on the brand new monkey, beat him up. They replace it with another monkey. Now we got 1 old, 3 new. Same thing, the newest monkey tries to go up, everybody jumps on him and beats him up. They replaced the last monkey now. So they replaced the last monkey with a brand new monkey. Now, none of these 4 monkeys have been sprayed with water at all. But when the newest monkey went up the ladder, what did the 3 monkeys do? Beat him up. Okay? Now, if I took one of those monkeys, if a monkey could talk, and I took one of those monkeys out of the cage and asked them, why are you beating up the monkey that walks up the ladder? Because remember, none of these have been sprayed with water now, so they really don't know why, right? What do you think that they would say to me? That's just the way we do things around here, right? They don't even know, right? They don't even know. Why do I bring this up? Because learning is based on an emotion of your environment. Learning is based on an emotion on your environment. If it's a negative environment, you're gonna learn negative things. If it's a positive environment, you're gonna learn positive things. So why do I bring this up? How many of this happens in our office every day? How many times have you hired a new CA, she comes in and goes, hey, why don't we try this? It's a new app I got. And people are like, we don't do that. And they're like, how come? And they're like, because we just don't. Because we never have, right? We don't do any of the Google stuff. We never have, right? They do that. So let me ask you a question. What do you think happens when you look at a child and say you're an idiot? What do you think happens when you look at someone and say you're worthless? You'll never amount to anything. Those neurons burn in their brain. They burn in their brain because it's tied to that emotion. And as soon as it's tied to that emotion, the hippocampus fires like crazy. The subluxation causes those negative firing to happen in that hippocampus. By adjusting these people, not only are you helping their learning disabilities, you're literally you're changing their personality by rewiring their brain. You guys with me? This is how cool this stuff is. Another thing I need to introduce you to is a compound called dopamine. Now, dopamine, you need dopamine to be happy. Okay, dopamine is that hormone that's released when you anticipate something. You ever really want something? You're like, oh my God, I can't wait to meet this person. Oh my God, I really need this chocolate cake. Anytime you anticipated anything, that's dopamine being released. Okay, you ever hear of people saying, I'm an adrenaline junkie. What I need to do is go jump out of an airplane. I love that. No, you're not an adrenaline junkie. You're a dopamine junkie. Okay, get your drugs straight. All right? You're a dopamine junkie. Dopamine's released way before adrenaline jumps in. So why do I bring that up? Do you want to know the reason people call themselves adrenaline junkies and all that kind of stuff? It's because when you lack dopamine in your brain, because you need the right amount. Too much, no good. Too little, no good. You need the right amount. When people lack dopamine, they will do what I call chasing dopamine, which means you'll do dangerous things in order to release dopamine in your mind. So they'll jump out of a plane, they'll go bungee jumping, they'll drive real fast. Someone would even do something like this. If it's out of their character, they'll have something like a one-night stand when it's typically out of their character. And if you ever walked up to someone that has had a one-night stand that's typically out of their character, and you say, how come? Their response is always this. Their response is, I don't know, I just kind of got caught up in it all. Yeah, you got caught up in the dopamine release of it all. All that excitement, all that push, that's dopamine being released. Now, you need some of that. You need the right amount, because without the right amount of dopamine, you'll go into depression. Okay? Too much dopamine, no good. Too little dopamine is no good too. Why do I bring up dopamine? Why is it even important for you to understand it? Because cortisol, that stress hormone that gets released with the subluxation, damages dopamine. It causes a less release of dopamine. So when people are subluxated in your office, they're what? They're sad. They're depressed. They don't like that stuff. Things like fibromyalgia, depression, all this stuff comes from these hormone changes in the brain. See, when you're releasing that stress hormone cortisol, it makes dopamine decrease. Do you know what happens when dopamine decreases in the brain? You lose fluid motion. So if you see like an adult like myself, if I'm ever sitting down and I'm under stress, my legs shaking like crazy, my arms are shaking, I'm fidgety, I feel like I have ants in my pants, I can't sit still. Do you know what they call that in a child? ADHD. See, ADHD is because of a lack of dopamine in the child's brain, but never forget this. It's not because the brain can't produce dopamine. That's all BS. That's all BS. It's because it's getting a signal from cortisol saying, don't release dopamine. It's a very big difference between I can't release it and don't release it. Do you understand me? When they're subluxated, cortisol is constantly going to be saying to them, don't release dopamine, so you get weird behaviors in a child. So what happens in the child is they run around, they go crazy, all this kind of stuff. The big thing that you have to know is this. What if you have too much dopamine? If you have too much dopamine, you start to bicker with someone a great deal. You start to argue. You're argumentative. You don't like things. And you want to know how powerful this hormone is? If I have really too much dopamine, I'll be a schizophrenic. Schizophrenia is just you have way too much dopamine in your brain. Think about that for 1 second. The difference between you and an individual who sees and hears people that do not exist is one hormone in their brain is too high. See how powerful these hormones are. And if you have an imbalance because of a stress response, everything gets thrown. Everything. The other one I want to talk about is something called serotonin. Now, serotonin, you need the perfect balance of this too. You need, just like dopamine, too much and too little is no good. You need the perfect balance of this. So this is like satisfaction. So if dopamine was an anticipation, like, oh my God, serotonin, satisfaction. You're very satisfied with what you have. You're very happy with what you have, okay? So far, so good? Good. Serotonin, what I need you to understand is this, has a major response with pain perception. The more serotonin you have released in your body, the less you're gonna complain of pain. Okay, that's proven in research. So let me ask you a question. How on earth can you be a pain-based chiropractor? How can you be pain-based? You can't win that game. You can't win. You cannot win. There's already research that shows that if someone feels depressed and they walk into your or anybody else's office, their level of pain perception is increased just because they're having a bad day. And if they're having a good day, guess where their level of pain perception is? Down the toilet. So how can you be pain-based if it has nothing to do with what you're doing? Do you understand what I'm saying? You can't chase pain. Pain is a perception based on hormone release from the brain, different areas of the brain firing. You can't be pain-based. All you can be, if you want to be a true chiropractor, is subluxation-based to reset the nervous system and rewire the brain. The body will do everything else. But we need to understand how this actually happens. Because you know what? You know what else? Like the adjustment releases serotonin, which is what we want. Stops the stress response, releases good serotonin. Guess what decreases serotonin? Stress. Cortisol. As soon as you have all kinds of cortisol, serotonin plummets in the brain. That's why when people are stressed, they're easily going to go into depression. They're easily going to complain of things like, or be diagnosed with fibromyalgia, things of this nature, all these pain amplification syndromes. They don't have any serotonin in their system, or very little. So you know what releases serotonin? When they're depressed, what do they reach for? Sugar. They sit back and be like, oh, I had a bad day, where's my chocolate, right? That's the first thing that they're going to be thinking of, or carbs. Because as soon as you eat carbs and eat sugar, that has a temporary release of serotonin. That's why when a lot of people are depressed, they constantly turn to the refrigerator as something to pacify them. So as a chiropractor, every time somebody walks into your office and you adjust them, you'll release serotonin, and that's that thing. Do you know how many people, I have been practiced 15 years, okay? I've had people walking into my practice for the entire duration that I've been in existence. They haven't had pain for 12, 13, 14 years. But if you asked any of them, they'll never miss an adjustment. And if you ask them, why do you like going to Dr. John so much? They can't even put their finger on it. They don't even know. They're like, well, I haven't felt pain in years. But they'll say this, but I've never felt better in years either. They can't put their finger on it because it's that awesome hormone release that we're tapping into. This is where we are powerful as chiropractors. This is where you're all powerful as chiropractors. You know what else releases serotonin? This is why you have to have a great team in your office. A positive CA at the front door. Because the patient walks in and sees who first? The CA. The chiropractor is the middleman. Because the CA greets the person, takes care of them, then they go see the chiropractor, get a chiropractic adjustment, and then who do they see on the way out? The CA again. So if you have a great CA at the front, you're releasing serotonin before the patient even walks through to meet the chiropractor. That's why it's so essential to have a people, person-orientated CA at the front. Because if I walk into an office, people are like, John, how are you? So good to see you. How was work today? Oh my God, it's so good. Doctor will be ready for you in 5 minutes. Take a seat. Tell me about your dog. We love your dog. He's so great. I'm like, man, I feel great. You know what I mean? I haven't been adjusted yet. I feel fantastic. Right? But if you have a dragon lady in the front, and they're like, you're 5 minutes late, we hate you, Dr. John's already behind. I'm gonna tell you something right now. No one will ever get better in your clinic. No one will ever you can be the best adjuster in the history of the world. If you have a terrible attitude and your staff has a terrible attitude where people just don't like coming, serotonin will not be released in your office. And if serotonin is not released in your office, they will come to you for a short while and be like, I'm out of here. I don't like it here. This is how powerful these hormones are. And the big thing with serotonin, this is how it all affects it. See, serotonin gets decreased by cortisol. And as soon as we adjust people, we stop the cortisol release, so serotonin gets equalized in the brain again. The next major hormone we have to understand that someone touched on earlier is oxytocin. Oxytocin is the hormone that makes you feel attached to somebody else, or that bonding between two people. If you ever feel an attachment or a bond between two people, that is oxytocin being released from your brain. And here's the cool thing about this. This synergizes with estrogen, which means this. Men and women have oxytocin, but women's oxytocins are kind of like on steroids when it mixes with estrogen because it synergizes with it. Okay? That's why a female will feel more of a bonding or an attachment to someone, doesn't matter if it's male or female, because more oxytocin is being released in that individual. Men have it released too, don't get me wrong. The more oxytocin that's released into the blood, it prevents depression. You cannot be depressed if oxytocin is being released in your brain. To show you how powerful oxytocin is the hormone that is released if you've ever had a sexual orgasm. So if you've ever had a sexual orgasm and that euphoric feeling that we all chase and crave, that is oxytocin being released. Have you guys not had a sexual orgasm? Because we should have a totally different talk if that's the case, okay? This is not a good sign, all right? Okay? Okay? Now here's the thing I need you to understand. Oxytocin is optimally released with touch. See, you'll go to there's some great speakers out there, they'll be like, I can release oxytocin just by talking to you nicely. That's true, but never forget, only a smaller percentage of oxytocin will be released. You have to touch the person in order for optimal release of oxytocin to take place. That's where we are powerful as chiropractors. We always put our hands on top of someone. Plaza did a great study in 2014 out of the University of Barcelona. They showed that when they adjusted the spine, they increased the release of oxytocin in the brain. They increased the release of another hormone called neurotensin, which increases serotonin in the brain, and they increased the release of cortisol short term. Now, cortisol short term is good for you, remember. It's the long-term release that kills you. And they already proved this. You see, like I said at the very beginning of this, you are brain doctors. You've always been brain doctors. It's just now the research is starting to look at what happens to the brain when you get a chiropractic adjustment. You guys with me on this? We are so much more powerful than we were ever led to believe. And that's the craziness behind it. But again, I don't want you to believe. I want you to understand. Because when I look at my patients and they sit back and they're like, I don't know why I have to come in for maintenance adjustment. I say, no, you have to come in for I know you haven't been in pain forever, but you got to remember, we're releasing all those good hormones in your brain. We're stopping the stress hormones to release. And they're like, really, that all happens? Yes, it does. The reason I need you to understand studies like this is not for you to believe, it's for you to be certain. That's the big thing with this. The more certain you are, the more confidence you bring to the table when you're in front of a patient, when you're in front of a colleague, when you're in front of anybody else. This is when we are most powerful educating about chiropractic. You guys with me on this? That's the big thing. So here's oxytocin now. See, it's been shown in research that oxytocin will stop firing of the amygdala. And if you forget what the amygdala does, that's the part of your brain that's all about aggression and fear. Listen to that, aggression and fear, okay? If you have oxytocin release, you stop that in the brain, okay? It stops the stress response overall. If you're under stress and oxytocin is being released, the stress disappears, okay? Another thing that most people don't understand or might forget is that oxytocin is the hormone that is released that allows the uterus to start to contract in labor, okay? See, if you think back a little bit to your physiology lab, if you remember how everything takes place, estrogen and progesterone stay way up high here until a certain hormone tells it to be more sensitive to oxytocin. It's oxytocin that allows contractions to occur, delivery of birth, the whole kit and caboodle. So let me ask you a question. If you have a lack of oxytocin in your body, can this take place? Can a woman go through a proper birthing procedure if she is lacking the one hormone she needs to initiate contraction? Is that possible? No, it is not possible. So what does that increase the incidence of these poor women? C-sections, induction, right? Any of those type of things. See, this is why so many people come to me, they're like, John, you're basically saying that the subluxation is involved in everything. Yes, I am, but I can prove it. That's the difference. Because as soon as we understand that the stress response is released with the subluxation, then we start playing with hormones. And as soon as hormones start to play around, that's when we have a mess up of everything else. Okay? Now the last thing I want to talk about is something called vasopressin. Now vasopressin, this is attraction. Okay, so oxytocin was bonding, you felt the bond with someone. This is the initial attraction. If you've ever looked at anyone's like, that girl is hot, that guy is hot, that was vasopressin that was released. This synergizes with testosterone, okay? So why is this important? Because females are auditory learners more than men are. Men are more visual learners than females for the most part. That's why if you're doing a report of findings with someone in your office and she happens to be female, you need to be able to explain and articulate well with your words in order for her to be with you that entire time, for her to sense that bonding, to want to be a patient in your office. If you're with men, they don't talk that much. They don't want to listen all that much either. but they want, right? Everybody's like, we know, we're married. Okay, I got it. But they're very visual. So if you're speaking to a man about chiropractic and his chiropractic care, you have to bring out diagrams, charts, scans, whatever. You have to do something visual so that they can get what you do. Okay? This synergizes with testosterone, and here's the cool thing about vasopressin. In men, if they feel threatened, it makes them very aggressive. It makes them feel very competitive to another man. You guys with me on this? See, a lot of times people are like, that person's jealous. It's actually not jealousy. It's actually not jealousy. If they feel threatened by another man, their competitive side and their aggressive side will come out because of vasopressin here. So these people will come into your office and their wife might say something like, I don't know what's wrong with him, but he argues with me a lot more, he bickers a lot more, he's much more irritable. That's a man under stress, because when a man is under stress, vasopressin can't be released that well, so all of a sudden we have all these behavior problems. You guys with me on this? The big thing that I need you to understand is that when vasopressin is released in its proper amounts, it helps the hippocampus. Remember that structure I taught you earlier that's about learning and memory? If vasopressin is released properly, it is going to help with memory and learning. See, all these hormones all kind of melt into one thing. They're all helping each other now. So far, so good? Okay. The other thing I need you to understand is that it has a major role in fluid movement in your body. If you've ever read awesome studies that are out there, especially in the upper cervical world, where they show that they adjust the Atlas or C2 even, and they have major effects on blood pressure. So everybody theorized it must be because we're taking pressure off of the brainstem, and the brainstem is associated with blood pressure and all that kind of stuff. That's part of the story. That's part of the story. The other part of the story is you're also equalizing hormones in the brain like vasopressin, which its main job is fluid movement and blood pressure in the body. That's why you have to be measuring blood pressure in your offices and showing people before and after, before they started care, and at 8 weeks of adjusting that their blood pressure is decreased, their heart rate is decreased, all these kind of things start to happen. This is how we start to show people that we're much more than pain, that we're actually improving their overall health and well-being. Here's the last thing I want you to know is there was a study that was recently produced that instead of it just causing fluid stuff in the kidneys, it also has a major amount of fluid in the brain. When you release vasopressin, it's not just about absorbing water into the kidneys and making sure all is well. That's part of what it does. The other thing is it makes sure that the cerebral spinal fluid in the brain circulates properly so that cerebral spinal fluid can take the waste out and excrete it. You know what happens when too much waste builds up in the brain? You get kind of all these weird things like plaques that people call MS. You understand me? See how big this is? This is much bigger than putting a bone back in place. This is much bigger than that. You are not spine doctors, you are brain doctors, and I want you so certain in that if anybody tries to waver you even the slightest, you will never waver from it. I started this whole talk with Rocky, and I want to ask you a question. Do you know how the movie Rocky was made? Do you know this at all? Sylvester Stallone was watching a fight on TV between Muhammad Ali and a guy by the name of Chuck Wepner. You've probably never heard of Chuck Wepner before because Chuck Wepner was a low-level boxer, but he was fighting Muhammad Ali, and he was giving everything he's got. And Muhammad Ali was beating him up, he's butchering him in the ring, and he kept knocking him down again and again, but he got back up over and over and over again. And Sylvester Stallone was watching this on TV and was inspired, not by Muhammad Ali, he was inspired by the guy who wouldn't give up. He literally sat down at his desk and for the next 24 hours straight wrote the entire script of Rocky, 24 hours. Fixed it up over the next 3 days, but had the entire script. Then he tried to sell it. And again, he's a low-level actor, starving on the streets. He's got a dog and his wife, but he's literally poor. Like, listen, we were all students, you know, eating Kraft dinner every night. That's what he was doing, okay? Everybody rejects him. He takes it to multiple people. Everybody says, no, we don't want it. It's predictable. It's stupid. We don't want this movie. Then they go to one finally says, we love this. We're willing to pay you $100,000 for your script. He says, okay, I got one condition. And I'm going to wrap this up because I'm almost done. I got one condition. I have to play Rocky. And they said, nope, forget it. He goes, okay, forget it. He's starving. He turned down $100,000 in 1976. They came to him a bunch of other times. It went up to $400,000. They wanted the script, but not him. And he said, no, I still won't do it. He got so low that he said the lowest point of his life was then when he stood in front of a liquor store and had to sell the thing he loved the most, which was his dog. He sold his dog for $50 and cried the entire way home because he couldn't feed his dog anymore. His wife left him. The people came back to him one last time and said, okay, final offer. We're gonna pay you $25,000 for your script. You can play the lead role. That way, if you screw it all up, we won't lose a whole lot of money, okay? He says, deal. First thing he does with the money, he goes back to the liquor store and waits 3 days for the guy to walk by with his dog. No kidding. He sold his dog for $50. Do you know what he bought his dog back for? $15,000. Plus, the guy has a role in the movie Rocky. I'm not kidding, okay? I don't know if you guys know this or not, but that year, Rocky won the Best Picture at the Academy Awards. And when he walked up to Sylvester Stallone after an interview, he said, what did you do tonight? He goes, you know what I did? I pulled out every one of the rejection letters and I read them to myself of everybody saying this movie was a loser and I should never be playing it. He said, because there was one thing I was always certain about. I was certain about this script and I was certain I was born to play that role. And this is what I want you to have. I want you to have that same certainty. You are born to be a chiropractor, so prepare yourself and never waver. Thank you very much.